Steve Hilton, do you agree with that analysis?
I think, first of all, when it comes to Apple, John, and by the way, excuse me, I'm sorry about my voice. I was just over in London. I'm afraid picked up a rather bad cold.
Big mistake to come to London in the winter, when you can stay in California.
I'll struggle through.
Go on, it sounds fine.
In relation to Apple, I think that, that's an amazing company led by brilliant, smart, creative people, and you can be sure they're working on the next big product that will keep them at the top. But I think the crucial thing in this discussion is actually a phrase you used earlier. We said nothing lasts forever in business. I think that's absolutely true right now in the technology sector, where if you think about it, just in the last decade or so, you've had giant companies that seem so dominant, completely lose that dominance. If you think about Microsoft, IBM, and MySpace, the churn rate, the turnover of companies that really do stay at the top is much shorter now. And that's a good thing. That's how capitalism is supposed to work, because in the end, that delivers great products and services for people in the marketplace. The trouble is that in other sectors of industry, you don't see that same sense of competition. And I'm afraid that in many sectors like banks and telecoms and so on, it is a bit like nothing. Things do last forever. Companies, incumbents do stay at the top for too long, and they're not challenged enough. And that's where a lot of the anger with business and capitalism comes from.
And the thing is, it's so much easier, isn't it, to set up a tech. I mean, you go over to California, 5 minutes later, you've got your own company. I mean, you can just set it up. You haven't got to build a factory. You haven't got to do this, that, and the other until you start going into serious production and all that, and then you get somebody else to make your things, whatever they may be.
That's exactly right. The barriers to entry are incredibly low, particularly, as you said, in relation to software companies, not so much hardware companies. But if you look at Facebook and Google and Amazon and Netflix, these vast companies that actually we may look at and think, look, they're so dominant, but actually they're looking over their shoulder the whole time and seeing new challenges to their business, started either in a dorm room in Stanford University just down the road from where I'm speaking to you, or somewhere across the other side of the world, that can very quickly get going and accumulate literally hundreds of millions of users in the space of a couple of months. And you're seeing that more and more regularly now.
Linda, do you agree that it's, well, I won't suggest to you that Apple has had its day, because that would be daft at this stage, of course, still massively successful, but
there are certainly challengers on the horizon. So if you look at the biggest 5 smartphone makers in the world, the biggest is still Samsung, and Apple has been catching up. But the next 3 are all Chinese companies. And if you expand that beyond the smartphone space, similarly for a company like Google, there's competition in terms of search engines like Baidu coming out from China. You also have the same thing with Alibaba, this Chinese company that's rivaling Amazon. So indeed, Apple is the most valuable company in the world by market capitalization. It's just reported the most profitable quarter in U.S. corporate history, once again beating its own record from a year ago. But that doesn't change the fact that once it gets to the top for technology companies, it almost always is facing something around the horizon. And Tim Cook, on his earnings call, revealed where they may be looking at next, which is virtual reality. Quite unusually, he commented, that's not a niche market. That may indeed be the next thing. And I think that kind of comment gives you an idea that perhaps for all of these companies reinventing innovation, that has to be how they stay, if not at the top, near the top.
Exactly. And Steve Hilton, as far as Google is concerned, Linda mentioned Google, you talked about anger with Google. Do you sympathise with the public exasperation? Well, it's a bit more than that, anger in this country about their tax arrangements and specifically the deal that's just been done?
Well, the first thing I just want to make clear for your listeners, John, just in terms of full disclosure, is that my wife was for many years a senior executive at Google. She actually has left and joined another hot tech company, Uber, right now, not exactly free from controversy. So I do hear a lot about these things. I shouldn't comment specifically on the Google arrangement that's just been made, because I don't know the details, and they can speak for themselves.
But you do know it's a trivial amount of money compared to the sums they've been making.
Your question was, do I appreciate the anger? Yes, I very much do. I think that there is a growing sense of the sense of companies that are so big and so dominant in their not just in the marketplace, but in the way they relate to governments, in their lobbying efforts and so on, that they really are above the law. And I think that although in this particular case, I think they've made clear that they were abiding by the law then when the arrangements caused anger, and now when they've got the new arrangements. The truth is that those of us who really believe in the power of business and capitalism to do good things for society, and I'm definitely one of those people, we've really got to make clear to businesses that they have a responsibility to behave in a way that earns public trust. Because otherwise what you're going to see happen is a growing call for policies that actually damage the capacity of business to grow and create jobs and do all the things we want them to do. So I think it's really important for them to be aware of that and to respond to that.
So how should governments respond then if they are seen to be above the law? After all, it's governments that have allowed them to get there.
I think that there's a couple of things I'd say. First of all, going back to our earlier discussion around technology, the crucial idea here is that of competition and of barriers to entry. What policy has to do is to really work hard to dismantle those barriers to entry and to stop companies from building up the kind of dominant positions in a marketplace that keep competitors out and act against the public interest. And I think that the threshold for competition in the UK and elsewhere is much too high and much too narrow. Because at the moment, the competition authorities really only look at one thing when they're deciding whether a marketplace is sufficiently competitive. And that is quite a narrow calculation about the consumer benefit, whether prices are low and so on. And actually, there's a whole range of other things that we should really care about and that people care about. The impact on local communities of the way businesses behave, the impact on employment, on the supply chain. You look at it in the supermarket sector with the way that low prices are driving farmers out of business, for example. So I think the first thing is to really have a competition policy regime that takes account of more things and is a much, much lower threshold, so you can't have so many dominant companies in a market.
Steve Hilton? Steve, go on. If you can make it terribly quick, I'd appreciate it.
It's about lobbying. I do think we've got to shine a much stronger spotlight on the behind-the-scenes lobbying that big businesses do for government and civil servants and organisations like the European Union to get their way.
Steve Hilton and Linda Yu, thank you both very much indeed.